The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, smiled then and said, "They will all be Muslim spoils tomorrow if Allah will." That night Anas bin Abi Murthad al-Ghanawi volunteered to guard Abu Dawud. On their way to Hunayn they saw a great green nab plant that was called Anwar, the one with suspenders. That was because the Arabs used to hang their weapons on it, slay beasts under it and keep to it. So some of the army members asked the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, to make them a nap with suspenders like the one they had. "Allah is the greatest of all," he said, "I swear by the one in whose hand is Muhammad's soul, that you have just said what the people of Moses said to him. They said, make us a god as the one they have. Surely you are ignorant people. These are sunnah, but you will follow and comply with the modes of life of those who preceded you." At Tirmidhi, seeing how great in number the army was, some of them said, "We shall not be defeated." Their statement sounded hard upon the Messenger of Allah, PBUH. The Islamic army stunned the archers and the attackers on Wednesday night, the 10th of Shawwal. The Muslim army arrived at Hunayn. Malik bin Auf, who had previously entered the valley by night, gave orders to his army to hide inside the valley and lurk for the Muslims on roads, entrances, and narrow hiding places. His orders to his men were to hurl stones at Muslims whenever they caught sight of them and then to make a one-man attack against them. At early dawn, the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, started mobilizing his army and distributing posts and flags to people. In the dark and just before dawn the Muslims moved towards Hunayn Valley. They started descending into it unaware of the presence of an enemy lurking for them inside the valley. So at the moment they were camping, arrows began showering intensively at them, whereas the enemy's battalions started a fierce attack against the Muslims, who had to retreat in disorder and utter confusion. It was such a shatteringly defeat that Abu Sufyan bin Harb, who had recently embraced Islam, said that their retreat would not stop till they got to the Red Sea. Jamila or Kilda bin al-Hunayd commented on that by saying, "Surely magic has grown inactive today." The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, turned to the right and said, "Come on, people. I am the Messenger of Allah. I am Muhammad, the son of Abdullah." Those who stood fast by him were only a few emigrants and some of his kinsmen. The matchless bravery of the Prophet, was then brought to light. He went on and on in his attempts to make his mule stand fast in the face of the disbelievers while saying loudly, truly saying, "I am the Prophet, I am the grand son of Abdul Muttalib." However, Abu Sufyan, who was then holding the rein of the Prophet's mule, and Al-Abbas, who was holding its stirrup, were endeavoring to make it halt. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, dismounted and asked his Lord to render him help. "O Allah, send down your help." Muslims returned to the battlefield and the fierceness of the fight. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, ordered his uncle Al-Abbas, who was a sonorous-voiced man, to call out on the followers. As loudly as he could, Al-Abbas shouted, "Where are the lancers?" "By Allah," Al-Abbas said, "upon hearing my voice calling them back, they turned round to the battlefield as if they had been oryxes, wild cows, tending towards their calves. Here we are, at your service. Here we are. Sahih Muslim 2/100, they said. There you see them trying to stop their camels and reverse to the battle. He who was unable to force his camel to turn back, would take his armor, fling it round his neck, and hastily dismount his camel with his weapon in his hand, letting his camel move freely and run towards the voice source. Voices would grow louder and louder till 100 of them gathered around the Prophet and resumed the fight. Those who were called out upon next were Al-Ansar, the helpers, folks of Al-Ansar. Folks of Al-Ansar. The last group to be called out upon was Bani al-Harith bin al-Khatsraj. Muslim battalions poured successively into the battlefield in the same manner that they had left it. The stamina of both parties was superb. Both of them stood fast and fought fiercely. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, was so eagerly and furiously watching the battle that he said, "Now the fight has grown fierce." Picking up a handful of earth, he hurled it at their faces while saying, "May your faces be shameful." Their eyes were thick with dust and the enemy began to retreat in utter confusion. Reverse of fortunes and the enemy's utter defeat. Few hours had elapsed since the earth handful was hurled at the enemy's faces when they were shatteringly defeated. About 70 men of Thaqif alone were killed, and the Muslims plundered all their riding camels, weapons, and cattle. All, glory is to him, alluded to this sudden change in the Quran when he said, "And on the day of Hunayn, battle, when you rejoiced at your great number but it availed you naught in the earth, vast as it is, was straitened for you, then you turned back in flight. Then Allah did send down His Sakinah, calmness, tranquility, and reassurance, etc., on the Messenger, Muhammad, PBUH, and on the believers, and sent down forces, angels, which you saw not, and punished the disbelievers. Such is the recompense of disbelievers." Al-Quran 9:25-26, hot pursuit of the enemy after their defeat, some enemy troops headed for Ta'if, others to Nakhla and Audas. A group of Muslims headed by Abu Amir al-Ash'ar, were dispatched to chase the enemy. Some skirmishes took place during which Abu Amir was killed. A similar battalion of horsemen pursued the idolaters who threaded the track to Nakhla and caught up with Durayd bin Asima, who was killed by Rabia bin Rafi. After collecting the booty, the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, left for Ta'if to face the greatest number of the defeated idolaters. The booty was 6,000 captives, 24,000 camels, over 40,000 sheep, and 4,000 silver ounces. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, gave orders that booty should be confined at Al-Jiranah and ordained Masud bin Amr al-Ghafari to be in charge of it. It was only when he was entirely free from Ta'if campaign, that one of the captives as Shaima, the daughter of al-Harith Sadia, the messenger's foster sister, was brought to the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, introduced herself to him. Upon recognizing her by a certain mark, he honored her, spread for her his garment, and seated her on it. He was graceful and released her and made her turn back to her people. Ta'if campaign is in fact an extension of Hunayn Ghazwa, that is because the majority of the defeated troops of Huzn and Thaqif went into Ta'if with the general commander, Malik bin Auf al-Nasri, and fortified themselves within it. So upon finishing with Hunayn invasion, he gathered the booty at Al-Irana in the very month, i.e. Shawwal, and in the 8th year, a vanguard battalion of 1,000 men led by Khalid bin al-Walid marched towards Ataif. Whereas the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, proceeded to pass through Nakhla al-Yamaniyah, Karn al-Manazil, and Laya. At Laya there was a castle that belonged to Malik bin Auf, so the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, gave orders to have it destroyed. He resumed his march till he got to Ta'if. There he dismounted, camped near its castle, and laid siege to the castle inhabitants, but not for long. How long the siege continued, is still a matter of disagreement. It however stands between 10 to 20 days. Sahih Muslim, narrated by Anas, AWS, Fathul Bari 845. A lot of arrow shooting and rock hurling occurred during the siege. For as soon as the Muslims laid siege around the castle, its people started shooting arrows against them. The arrows were so intense and fierce that they looked as if they had been locusts on the move. A number of Muslims were wounded and 12 were killed. To be far from the arrow range, the Muslims had to ascend to a higher location and camped on, i.e. to what is now called Ataif Mosque. The Prophet, PBUH, set up a mangonel and shelled the castle. Eventually, a gap was made in the castle wall, through which a number of Muslims managed to pass into the castle, sheltered by a wooden tank, with the purpose of setting fire to it. Anyway, the enemy poured down a molten hot iron on them. Affected by this, the Muslims stepped out of the tank and were again exposed to arrow shooting, and consequently, some of them were killed. To force the enemy to surrender, the Prophet, PBUH, tended to a war policy of burning and cutting the enemy's crops. His order was to cut their vineyards and burn them. Seeing that the Muslims started rapidly cutting and burning their vines, they implored the Prophet, PBUH, to stop and have mercy on them for the sake of Allah and out of kinship motives. So the Prophet agreed. When the caller of the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, called out unto people saying, He whosoever descends and steps out of the castle is free. 23 men came out. Sahih al-Bukhari 2620, one of them was Abu Bakr, who tied himself to a wall and let himself down by means of a small wheel, that would normally be used for drawing up water from a well. The way he let himself down made the Prophet nickname him Abu Bakr, i.e. the man with the wheel. The Messenger of Allah set them all free and entrusted each one of them to a Muslim to care about their living affairs, which was too hard for the castle folks people to bear. Seeing that the siege lasted too long and that the castle was immune and could stand any siege, for they had already stored a supply that suffices for over a year, and that the Muslims were suffering, day by day, from arrow shots and heated iron hooks, the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, consulted Nawfal bin Muawiyah daily about that,